Okay, like most of us, I had absolutely no intention of bed sharing. During my pregnancy, I'd sort of consumed all of the information about babies have to sleep in their own space, and I just thought maybe it was kind of a bit weird to have a child sleeping in your bed with you. Fun fact though, did you know that most of the information that we've got about looking after babies and their sleep and everything was actually taught to us by a bunch of old men back in the 50s that didn't have any kids themselves? But I just naively believed that once we got through that newborn stage of them waking up every 3 hours, that she'd just sleep through, which is what a lot of the internet leads you to believe. And she did. Like around about 15 weeks old, she suddenly started sleeping through the night, and it was like, yes, this is amazing. And then the 4-month sleep regression hit and it just all went to complete shizzle. Obviously, bed sharing is like a really controversial subject to some, especially in the US. Like they're really completely against it. And I've talked about this on TikTok and had some proper vile comments. Like there are people out there that believe that if you bed share, that's it, like the worst is going to happen. And I've spent a lot of time educating myself on bed sharing because that's the only way any of us have been able to get any sleep. And I just thought I'd share my story with you in case it's something that you want to do or you are doing and you've not mentioned it to anyone because you're sort of like feeling guilty about it. I'm going to share with you what our bed sharing story, basically how we ended up there. And a recent survey by the Lullaby Trust showed that 8 out of 10 parents end up bed sharing at least once, but half of them don't know how to do it safely. Our journey started with like the early morning feed. So the 4-month sleep regression hit and there was a lot of waking up. There was a lot of sort of like not going back to sleep. And the 6 a.m. feed, John would have got up to go to work. So I was just like bringing her back into bed with me. She was breastfed at this point, and it was easy just to sort of like pop her next to me and stick a boob in her face. I didn't go to sleep at all at that stage because I was so terrified of like something horrendous happening. I was terrified of rolling on her or suffocating her or any of the like millions of things they tell you are going to happen if you bed share with your baby. So I researched safe bed sharing. There are a lot of like resources out there that give you the information. The Lullaby Trust is one of them. Sarah Ockwell Smith, James McKenna, Hey Sleepy Baby, like loads of people that do actual research rather than just scaremongering. Like a couple of people that I've mentioned there are actual scientists. And what I'll do is I'll list like all of the resources below that I use because it's eye-opening. If you get away from the mainstream narrative of babies having to sleep in their own space, I'm pointing to there as if the next to me is still there, rather than actually what is biologically natural. So once I'd like learned about it and accepted that it's completely natural for babies and toddlers to want to be next to their mums at all times, and that hasn't really changed now, 2.5. I actually started to get some sleep because obviously in those early days she woke up a lot. She was bottle fed breast milk. I was pumping up until she was 10 weeks old, and then obviously now the 4-month sleep regression. But I actually started to get more sleep than I'd had in months and months. There's a lot of singing going on. You singing. And I sort of started practicing with day naps. So we'd get into bed and she'd breastfeed to sleep, and we'd have like the safe situation set up, and I'd have a little nap as well. And then once I was sort of confident with that after a few times, we then started doing it in the morning as well. But getting her back to sleep had got harder and harder and harder. Like she wouldn't go, even before we started like the bed sharing, she wouldn't go back to sleep for ages after the 12 o'clock feed, and she'd be up around about 3 as well, and sort of like boobing her back to sleep and then trying to get her back into her next to me. It wasn't happening. So she started sort of like creeping into the bed earlier and earlier and earlier in the night. And at this point, John had already like started sleeping in the spare room because he was getting up at like 5 o'clock to go to work. He was already sleeping in the spare room in the weekdays. So it'd just be me and Babybel in here. And then so I'd be on this side over here, Babybel would be here, and then like the next to me would be here acting as like a really expensive bed guard. And we went on like that for about 3 months, and it was like the best sleep that I'd had for a long time. And then when she When she started rolling, I wasn't too worried about it, but once she started crawling, I was like, well, this bed is much too high, like she's gonna roll off, because babies flap about in their sleep loads. Once they start moving, they don't stop. So I was like, how is this gonna work? Because there's no way I can get her to sleep in a cot. Like, the thought of having to get her to sleep at night time, because she was 8 months old, she was still breastfed to sleep, and then lower her down into a cot that would have to be on the lowest setting because she was pulling herself up and like trying to climb on stuff. And I was like, I don't know how that's going to work. It's not going to work for bedtime. I can't face doing that at like 3 o'clock in the morning. She hadn't woke up. She'd started to go through a stage of not waking up too much. She was waking up maybe once or twice a night, but even so, I was like, it's just going to be a nightmare. Like, you get to know your baby and how they sleep, and there was no way that we were going to go from sleepy booby to being in her cot. So that's where I found floor beds, and a floor bed is literally just that. It's a bed on the floor. So I was like, right, this sounds like it could be... She's in my wardrobe touching on my clothes. What are you up to, baby? This sounds like it could be like the ideal thing for her. So what we did is we took out our bed frame in the spare room and just put the double mattress on the floor, because a floor bed is expensive, like quite expensive, and we knew that we were going to need a double one, because we knew that we were going to need to like feed her to sleep or pat her to sleep or snuggle her to sleep and then roll away. So we put the mattress on the floor and tried that. It was the best decision that we'd ever made. I could boob her to sleep and roll away. John could snuggle her and pat her to sleep and roll away. If she woke up in the middle of the night, or when she woke up in the middle of the night, could just get in next to her, boob her to sleep and roll away. And it got to the stage where it was just like, in the week, it was just easier to do that, because John was working so early. It meant that he got to have the sleep and I could just deal with Babybel in the spare room, and then at the weekend we'd swap and he'd have a night where he would be in there looking after her. That didn't go too well to start with. Like, there was quite a few months where we couldn't do that because she wasn't happy to have her in there, because she was still feeding during the night. We sort of persevered with that, and we got to the point where now I can actually get like a whole night of having sleep without her disturbing me. And it just means, like, rather than having her running around in the dark in the hallway and climbing into bed with us, which is going to happen, one of us is in there with her dealing with whatever happens, the other one's in here getting a full night's sleep, and it's like, it's amazing. Pros of bed sharing: it's easy just to whip a boob out. You barely even wake up. Once you get used to it, you barely even wake up. Like, especially when they're younger and they don't flap around loads. Obviously, as they get a bit older, there is a lot of sort of flapping around and they touch you. But that is just like, that's the biggest pro of it. There's no transfer once the baby's asleep. Like, if you've got one that does not stay asleep when you transfer them over, there's none of that. And that is, again, that's the reason we went for the floor bed. You get more sleep, baby gets more sleep. If you're doing it in like a separate situation, your other half gets more sleep as well. And then once you get to the stage where you can switch, do not run on the bed, please, thank you. Once you get to the stage where you can switch, you also get a night of sleep as well, which is worth its weight in gold. It's a lot easier to check on them when they're next to you. So even now, I will wake up and check on her. Like, if she hasn't woken up at all, or I've not heard her stirring, I will still check on her. And when they're younger, you do it a lot more. There's a lot of like checking to make sure they're still breathing and checking to make sure they're not too hot and everything. And it's just so much easier if you just got to reach out and they're there. There's a load of biological scientific benefits that I'm not going to go into because I'm not an expert on that, but I'll link some of it down in the description so you can just see that. But there's so much that's linked to like maternal mental health and independence and loads of stuff. I'll put that down in the description, and you get all those lovely baby and toddler snuggles. Like, one of my favourite things is to wake up on days like my birthday or Christmas Day or whatever, and you've just got like a baby snuggled up into you. It's just nice, because she's not going to want to do that forever. It'll be a few years time and she'll just be like, no thanks mum, don't want you to touch me. Cons: obviously there are going to be some cons. Sleeping in the same position all night is very, very uncomfortable. You end up sleeping in what's called the C curl, which is like the protective position, so that there's no bedding gets on it. Obviously all the bedding's out of the way, but like the pillow doesn't get on them or anything, and you end up staying in that position for quite a long time, and it does get quite uncomfortable. It can get quite cold. Obviously you're not going to have the duvet pulled right up. I sort of slept in like long sleeved tops as well, which made it a little bit easier, but you can't, if you like snuggling into the duvet, you can't do that. So it does get a little bit cold sometimes. Obviously in the summer it's fine. In the winter it's not so great. There is a lack of alone time. I think this is the biggest one for me, and it's lack of alone time just for me. Like, I like to wind down by reading a book and just sort of like having half an hour on my own, and you don't really get any of that. So for me, that's the biggest con. Like, you don't get any, you know, there's constantly a baby touching you all night and everything. As you can see, they're still she's still very, very snuggly now. Are you okay? Oh. So for me, I think that's the biggest con. But the pros have kind of outweighed that, because I do get nights where I don't have anybody touching me, which is fantastic. And then the last con is, once they start moving around and realise that they can help themselves, you do literally become an all-night open food buffet. Like, even now at 2.5, she does, do not touch mummy's laptop please. Even now at 2.5, she does like still sometimes in the night just like try and help herself to a snack. It's not ideal, but you want a mummy snack bar? We'll go and get a snack in a minute, baby. I'm just going to finish doing this and we'll go and get one. Been distracted again. Like, this is sort of, it tends to be my limit. I can film for about 15 minutes and then Babybel gets bored. So I think I've pretty much spoke about everything I wanted to talk about. But I just wanted to be like, just share this, like our situation, because I've spoken to a lot of people who have been like, oh yeah, we bed share as well, but we've not told anyone because we don't want to be judged for it. And so I wanted to get my situation out there just so that it can help you feel a little less alone and hopefully break down that like stigma of doing it. But anyway guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, don't forget to leave us a like and a comment and hit that subscribe button. Makes us really happy. Lets YouTube know the videos we're showing to other people. We'll see you next time. Bye. Get away.